All right, I believe we're ready to proceed. And I want to welcome everyone to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County. We're quite a conglomeration here. Everyone welcome and stronger for that. We want you to feel welcome here too, because we are all different. Each of us from different places, each with our own needs and gifts, which means that what is holy to you may not be to me, and what you call by one name, I call by another, yet we each find it holy. We gather together here because we need one another, and because this community needs each one of us. We are here to love and support each other and help Charlotte County be a better place. If you are joining us for the first time, and if you feel comfortable doing so, say hello in the chat feature so that we can say hello back. And if you would like to learn more about us, please check out the website for information at UUFCC.org. If you have a chalice at home, you'll have a chance to light it after I light the chalice here. And our lighting words today are those of Reverend Jennifer Grayson, who is currently interim minister at Tree of Life UU congregation in Illinois. So now we light our flame together. Universal mystery, guide us away from the desire to shine light in all corners. Teach us to embrace the night, for without the darkness, we never see the stars. Now, if you will please join me, we will speak our affirmation together. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. Now, I am quite delighted to introduce our guest speaker today, the Reverend Bruce Bodie, Minister Emeritus at Whimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Port Townsend, Washington. Bruce served that congregation for 14 years. I remember once after I'd been introduced as a visitor from Michigan, the woman next to me in the pew turned to me and she said, "No, you can't have him back." Well, Bruce retired from that congregation in 2018, but the woman was right. He and I go much further back, to the late 1970s, in fact, when Bruce came as associate minister to Fountain Street in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a liberal oasis in the desert of Michigan Calvinism. We loved his sermons, we loved his book groups, his poetry groups, one of which I took over and led when Bruce left to become a full-fledged UU minister. We called our group after him in his honor, the Bodie Book Group. Even then, when Bruce was no longer in town, and Jim and I, my husband and I, visited him and Flossie, his wife, several times. And for the record, I must say that Flossie is the most relaxed and easy to be with hostess and guest I have ever met. Qualities I greatly envy. As for you, Bruce, lover of poetry and sharer of Michigan memories with me, I welcome you to our fellowship.
Thank you, Sharon, for those very kind words of introduction. I didn't know that you had named that book group after me, but I'm very pleased. And I also, Sharon, I really like the content and phrasing of your welcome to everyone. And I'd like to add my welcome to you as well. I'm here in my home study at the opposite corner of the country from you. It's another port, not Port Charlotte, but Port Townsend in this case, on the Olympic Peninsula in the state of Washington. And indeed, as Sharon has said in her in her introduction of me, the two of us do go back many years. That also includes my officiating at the wedding ceremony of Sharon and Jim in the sanctuary of the Fountain Street Church in Grand Rapids. That was in 1997. And then the last time that my wife and I saw Jim and Sharon in person was just a few months shy of 3 years ago. It was the late fall of 2018. We stayed at the home of Jim and Sharon there in Port Charlotte. This was the weekend, I looked it up, December 8 and 9. And delightfully, we attended the church service in Port Charlotte on that Sunday morning. And now look, lo and behold, given the way the world has turned since then, I'm your guest speaker from across the country. I also want to say that, like our nation as a whole, we here on the other side of the country have been following the tragic news of the shocking collapse of the condo towers in Miami. Our hearts also wrenched as we watch the grief of loved ones as they struggle to gradually come to grips with their loss. There's so much sorrow in the world. And my sermon message this morning, though it wasn't planned with this tragedy in mind, does relate to what remains and to what connects us to our loved ones following their death. But before going in that direction, let me begin with opening words that remind us of why we come together in community, even virtually, on these Sunday mornings. Holy and beautiful is the custom by which we gather this Sunday morning. Here we come to give our thanks, to face our ideals, to remember our loved ones, to seek that which is authentic, and to serve integrity, beauty, and the qualities of life that make it rich and whole. Through this hour breathes the worship of all the ages, the sacred music of all history. Blessed are the ears that hear that eternal sound.
Thank you, Bruce. So it is time now for our traditional Book of Life at UUFCC, otherwise known as Joys and Concerns, or Joys and Sorrows, where we share these life milestones by entering them into the Book of Life. It's a physical book, a big book, big red book, when we're meeting in person. But while we continue to meet virtually, please simply email those joys and sorrows and personal milestones to bookoflife@uufcc.org. That address is also listed in our weekly updates. If you send your message no later than the Saturday prior to the service, the worship associate will read it to the congregation on Sunday morning. And after that service, these words will be entered into the actual red book. We have one joy today from Joanne Collins and Dick Schwartz, who happily announced the birth of Dick's second great-grandchild, Emily Sheets, on July 7th in Iowa. Mother Anna and baby Emily are doing fine. Let me add that surely there are other joys and sorrows out there among you, and we honor those even if they remain unspoken for now. Let's hold them in mind as we sing Muted, Spirit of Life.
Oh,
What remains after the death of a loved one? And what is it that is passed on from one life to another? The poem that was sent to you earlier in the week in your newsletter, and which was also on the screen at the beginning of the service, suggests one answer. That poem is titled Not Even Death by Margaret Jane Cole. And interestingly, I can't tell from this poem if the author herself is near death or whether it is the loved one to whom she is addressing the poem that is near death. But actually, the poem works both ways. And Laura, if you could bring that poem up, you will be able to follow it on the screen as I read it. Not Even Death by Margaret Jane Cole. There will be something here, some part of this left over past our final soft caress. A breeze at twilight carrying a kiss. The fragrance of a petaled loveliness that we have known. Some little shining edge of ecstasy on beauty's golden dart. And we will stand beside the jasmine hedge again, and love will spring from heart to heart. For memory will keep what it has heard forever etched upon the heart's own seed. And time shall not erase one tender word that love has written down for future need. Oh, dearest, hold this knowledge and be glad. Not even death destroys what love has had. This tender, touching poem suggests that the heart is like a storehouse where seeds of memory are kept and preserved. And the image that comes to my mind is that of a pomegranate fruit with its multitude of gem-like crimson-colored seeds, each seed having a tender memory of love etched upon it, a little packet of information that at the appropriate time will germinate, sprout, take root, grow, blossom, and bear fruit. Now, interestingly, these seeds of memory in the storehouse of our heart are not necessarily known to us at the time. For seeds are often tiny little things, so tiny that you don't even know they're adhering to you, as, for example, when you walk through a field of grasses and wildflowers or through a woods. And the seeds from the various plants, unbeknownst to you, stick to your clothing, attach themselves to the hair of your head, gather in the cuffs of your pants, and all without your awareness. You don't even know that you are collecting them, carrying them, and scattering them. So too, little seeds of memory stick to us unobtrusively, unbeknownst to ourselves or to those from whom we are receiving these memories. Poet Robert Bly, in a poem titled 4 Ways of Knowledge, says that each day we are asked to remember 1 or 2 things, just 1 or 2 things each day as we go through life. These are things that our parents aren't aware that we are remembering, things that aren't by any means the national news of the day, and things that often we ourselves are not aware we are remembering. We don't know and we can't control why we remember what we remember, but apparently something in us wants to or needs to remember. Something in us, our heart, let us say, wants and needs to remember. Our heart, a symbol of our deepest emotional self. Our heart wants and needs to collect these memories and store them for future reference and need. And our soul, a symbol of our deepest interior self and of that which most essentially belongs to us. Our soul also wants and needs to gather and collect memories that will be useful for it in the future. And we, in our conscious selves, don't even know why at the time. Maybe later we will learn why these seeds of memory attached themselves to us. Maybe later we will learn why the heart and the soul collected, gathered, and stored the particular memories they did. But at the time, we really don't know what we are gathering or why. Do you know why you remember what you remember? Many of you tuned in today have had many years of gathering memories. But have you figured out why the particular seeds of memory that have adhered to you did so? Why do the heart and the soul gather the memories they do? These are memories that are often, even usually, utterly strange, odd little things with no apparent rhyme or reason to them. It's not a rational thing, nor is it an intellectual thing. The things we remember, as Robert Bly suggests, are not what our parents would think we might remember. And of course, often they just as soon we wouldn't remember what we do remember, while the things that they wanted to teach us are often completely forgotten. Now, here's a little example of the oddness of memory, and it comes from a memorial service that I officiated some years ago. In the part of the service where we had a gathering and sharing of memories, a granddaughter of the deceased woman stood to speak about her dear departed grandmother. I have the oddest little memory of my grandmother, the woman said. I remember that when she was eating and nearly all the food on the plate was gone, she would use her little finger to pick up the crumbs from the plate. And then she would put her little finger to her mouth and eat those crumbs. And in this way, she cleaned her plate. The granddaughter continued, I don't know why I remember that, but I do. And now I find myself doing the very same thing. When I am just about finished eating, I pick up the crumbs from my plate with my little finger and I put them to my mouth. And when I do, I think of Grandma. Crumbs on the plate, little crumbs of no apparent account. And yet these crumbs are the seeds of memory. What is imparted to us is not usually what others have tried to impart to us. And actually, what others try to impart to us is remembered, if at all, often only negatively. What is most useful, it seems, are seeds of memory that we don't even know we are receiving and which others don't even know that they are giving. What is remembered by us is that which has heart stuff attached to it, or soul stuff, something that our heart has been pulled by, or something that our soul takes note of. So what do the heart and the soul like to remember? The heart, that which relates to our deepest emotional self, likes the following things, I think: connection, care, concern, and courtesy. And also this: kindness, gentleness, tenderness, and modesty. In other words, the heart likes what it itself is. And the soul, that essential unoriginated fire of which we are a part, what does the soul like? The soul likes the following, I think: reality, vitality, authenticity, and spontaneity. In other words, the soul likes what it itself is. And so the heart and the soul, usually without our conscious knowledge, gather, collect, store, and preserve seeds of memory so that they themselves might be nourished. And this might give us a clue as to how we should live our own lives and what it is that we give or have given to others. For we truly give to others when we give of ourselves, naturally, spontaneously, lovingly, and without necessarily the shaping of forethought, and certainly not the shaping by manipulation. We have to let go. We have to let the heart bubble over. We have to let the soul have its play. Well, think now, who has dropped seeds of memory into your heart or into your soul? Some years ago, reading Bill Moyer's interviews with American poets, I was struck by an interview with a contemporary American poet of Chinese descent by the name of Li Young Lee. He's a poet I heard speak a few years ago out here in Seattle. Now, Li Young Lee's father, as his son describes him, was a brilliant man of huge intellectual and artistic talents, also a wild and an exuberant man, and a scholarly man. He had a command of 7 languages. He was an entrepreneur who could make money and as easily let it go. And he was a man who later in his life became a Christian evangelist and finally a Presbyterian minister. And he was a forbidding presence of a man, a person who felt that he needed to give the appearance of strength, an individual who could not allow doubt into his public or even his private conversation. And he was a demanding man to his children with very high standards. He was the template by which his sons and daughters were to measure their lives. But what was remembered of this man? No doubt all of this had gone into his children in some way or another. But what his son, the poet Li Young Lee, remembered and appreciated was the opportunity to read his father's Bible after his father's death. And what did Li Young Lee find there in his father's Bible? He found notations in the margins of his father's Bible. Notations that were related to questions and doubts his father had. Questions and doubts his son had not known his father entertained because his father had never expressed them to his son and perhaps not to anyone else. So there, in his father's Bible, in the margins of his father's Bible, at the edge of his father's outward life and character, Li Young Lee saw a father in conversation with the sacred writings. And he saw for the first time a father in search, in doubt, and in need. For the first time, in other words, Li Young Lee saw a human father. And what a gift this was for his searching son. And how thankful the son was for this gift, these seeds of memory that his father didn't even know he was passing on to his son, seeds of memory dropped in the margins of the sacred writings, not in the sacred text itself, not in what was standard and expected, not in the holy words, but off to the side, in the margins, at the edge, scribbled, some no doubt illegible. These were the seeds, tiny, apparently insignificant, scattered seeds, not expected to be seen or found or used. These were the seeds that his son valued the most and found the most useful. Li Young Lee's father was human in other ways as well, and he planted other seeds of memory, gave his son other gifts that the poet didn't know he was receiving at the time, nor did his father know that these were the seeds he was planting or the gifts that he was giving. One day in his adulthood, Li Young Lee, now married, was carefully and tenderly removing a splinter from under the thumbnail of his wife's right hand, when it dawned on him where this capacity to so tenderly attend to her in this way had come from. Li Young Lee wrote about his discovery in a poem that was titled The Gift. And let me introduce this poem to you with the poet's own comment about the precipitating event and experience that lay behind this poem. In his interview with Bill Moyers, Li Young Lee said, I was with my wife in a hotel, and I woke up and heard her sobbing. I looked for her, and she was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, sobbing and holding her hand. I noticed that her hand was bleeding, and when I looked, there was a splinter under her thumbnail. My father was dead at the time, but when I bent down to remove the splinter, I realized that I had learned that tenderness from my father. Here's the poem titled The Gift by Young Lee, which you can follow on the screen. The Gift by Young Lee. To pull the metal splinter from my palm, my father recited a story in a low voice. I watched his lovely face and not the blade. Before the story ended, he'd removed the iron sliver I thought I'd die from. I can't remember the tale, but hear his voice still, a well of dark water, a prayer. And I recall his hands, 2 measures of tenderness he laid against my face, the flames of discipline he raised above my head. Had you entered that afternoon, you would have thought you saw a man planting something in a boy's palm, a silver tear, a tiny flame. Had you followed that boy, you would have arrived here, where I bend over my wife's right hand. Look how I shave her thumbnail down so carefully. She feels no pain. Watch as I lift the splinter out. I was 7 when my father took my hand like this, and I did not hold that shard between my fingers and think, metal that will bury me, christen it little assassin, or going deep for my heart. And I did not lift up my wound and cry, death visited here. No, I did what a child does when he's given something to keep. I kissed my father. My sermon message concludes with the pre-recorded singing of a haunting, wistful hymn from our hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition. This hymn is going to be sung by James Boyle and Linda Hines from your congregation, and I thank them for taking the time and for making the effort to record this hymn. And before I leave, I also want to thank my friend Sharon Whitehill for working with me on this service and for being the worship associate for the service. And I want to thank the technicians behind the scenes, Laura Anderson and Jackie McDaniel, for their technical expertise in making this service possible. So now the hymn you will hear is titled All My Memories of Love. The lyrics are those of the 20th century Russian poet Anna Akhmatova, and they're translated by the Reverend Mark Bellatini, who was actually instrumental in creating that our Singing the Living Traditional hymnal. Laura.
Willows in September touch the water. Rising up from the sunlit past comes the shadowed side, running toward me silently, love to fortify.
Many are the graceful hearts upon this tree, and it seems there's room for mine on these branches free. And the sky above the tree, whether wet or bright, is my ease and comforting, my good news and delight.
Right. Shall I proceed?
I think so, Sharon.
Okay, thank you. I'm having a little trouble with my screen. We now come to the offering, and I remind you that one of the most important goals of the world's faith traditions is to bring humanity closer through acts of creation and compassion. And that's the goal of this fellowship too, to become more generous in spirit and action. Our offering is a material way to express your generosity, because as you know, it supports this congregation and its ministries. You can make donations by mail or by auto payment through your bank or by using the Venmo app on your smartphone. However, if you are visiting with us today, please do not feel obligated to contribute, because your gift is your presence among us. Our closing today is from Zora Neale Hurston's novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. These are words from the narrator, Janie Mae Crawford, at the end of the book. And she is speaking of her husband, Tea Cake, who has died. And she says, of course he wasn't dead. He could never be dead until she herself had finished feeling and thinking. The kiss of his memory made pictures of love and light against the wall. Here was peace. She pulled in her horizon like a great fishnet, pulled it from around the waist of the world and draped it over her shoulder. So much of life in its meshes. She called in her soul to come and see. We move to the life of the community, the announcements, of which I have been given 0 today. So I will move on to our last rituals, extinguishing the chalice and the singing of our closing hymn. Please join me in these wherever you are. We now extinguish the chalice, but not the light of hope, the fire of commitment, or the warmth of community. May those ideals shine in our lives and warm our hearts until we are together again. Now we will join together in singing on mute, Go Now in Peace.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. and be